Hey, fellow traveler. Welcome to the Third Eye Awakening podcast, a show where we talk all about spiritual and psychic awakening, magic, the shift from 3D to 5D, star seeds, ascension, multiple timelines, multiple dimensions, the universe, the multiverse, the Akashic records, all the good things. I am your host, Amy Belair, and I'm so glad to have you here with me today. Okay, let's do this. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Third Eye Awakening. Today, I have with me Anita, the Midwitch. Anita is from Australia, and she is a leader in women's work, nature, and spirit-led birth support, and is the host of the Midwitch podcast, which is an amazing podcast. And Anita, actually, your reading of Jane Hartwick Collins' herstory I share in a couple of my programs, because I remember listening to that episode and just, wow, being so moved. So I'm really excited to have this conversation because I know that we have a lot in common that we haven't even explored yet at all. But thank you so much for being here. And I'd love to get into, first of all, who you are and what it is you do and how your spiritual awakening journey sort of unfolded and has led you to this place.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me, Amy. I'm so honored to be here. I'm so excited to have this conversation. So who am I? So apart from my work, I am also a mama of two. But yeah, as you said, I lead women. I've started in women's work, right? And then once I had my children, it moved towards birth more because I started to see that so much of the healing and so much of the work that women were doing with me in my circles and in energy healing was around birth, whether that was around their own birth story or a traumatic birth and not even like maybe they didn't even realize it was birth, but maybe a move away from that patriarchal conditioning. So that's a lot of the work that I do to bring women back to the spirit and nature-led ways of birth and living. So in terms of my own spiritual development and journey, when I was younger, I was very connected, very tapped in, and I didn't really have the language for it, but I used to have, I guess, visitations or people around me. And I do remember trying to voice that to well-meaning adults around me, and it wasn't received in the best way. And I got this kind of feeling, like maybe they didn't use the words, and maybe it was just because I can feel so much, but I got this feeling like, okay, that's not the right thing to say. I made them uncomfortable, or I don't know, whatever I thought as a child. So I shut it off for a long time and I didn't reconnect or kind of remember until I was maybe in my 20s. And I guess it's hard to pinpoint the very first moment, but I do remember in high school, actually I'd forgotten this, but I do remember in high school there was a boy in our grade, and his mum came to do meditation with us. And I just loved it so much. And everyone else hated it because we were supposed to be doing sport. I think it was when we were supposed to be doing sport and it was raining, and she would come in and do the meditation. I was so excited for it every week. And that's so funny. I'd forgotten about that. But that was maybe this very kind of like the gateway to like this silent space. And then I'd always had a diary and a journal, and I noticed like some of the things I started to write were, I don't know, just awakening me more. So I guess like the most poignant memory I can remember is going into like a new age shop that I kind of always used to. And I was in a really not a great time in my life. I was in a not a very nice relationship, an abusive relationship in my early 20s. And I just didn't know what to do. I felt so immersed in it. Anyway, I found a deck of cards and I was like, right, I need to buy a deck of cards. Whatever card I pick, like that will be my sign. And I got a card, and it was all about like forgiveness, was all about like boundaries. Even if you say no, it doesn't mean, I can't remember the exact wording, but it just hit me. And then from then on, it just started to unravel. The next point was when I went to a psychic party, and I remember being in the room of women who were waiting to have like their readings done. And I remember feeling like physically sick because of all of their energy. I suppose with the psychic who later turned into one of my mentors and such a beautiful lady. I suppose when she was there and she started opening up the realms and everybody started tapping into it and their excitement and their nervousness. And I think now looking back also, they probably had all, you know, their whole spiritual team with them and maybe people that wanted to connect with them from the other side. I just was in this room and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be sick. Like, this is just so intense. I remember walking outside and just, it was one of the first times where I actually voiced, like, I need to be out of this space. I can't handle the energy in this space. Anyway, when it came to my turn, I walked into the room and I just started crying. And it was like a preemptive cry because I sat down and she said, oh my gosh, like, I feel you, it's okay. And she said, do you know you're psychic? And I just said yes. And it was like the first time like I'd ever really been seen. And then I just cried and cried because it had been like I'd been holding this secret for so long, like just all of these things that I had seen and known and heard, and I just couldn't share. So yeah, I guess that was a really, really poignant time. And from then I just unraveled everything and just remembered everything. So yeah, that's kind of a a long story, but yeah, that is what I can remember anyway.
That's a beautiful story, and I could feel that when you said that she said, you know, you're psychic, and you got to say yes, and it was this feeling of not having to, like, it really reminds me of sort of the witch wound, which, you know, is just a label that we put on it to explain being powerful, being so powerful, and knowing that you're powerful, and knowing that it's dangerous to, or it has been in the past, dangerous to allow that power to be seen, and to just finally have that moment where you can just like claim it for yourself, but also be witnessed in it. It's it is a, like, I imagine that would have been a completely poignant moment. And I'm guessing, because of the nature of the work that you do now, that your experience with women and with pregnancy and birth also was like part of your awakening journey.
Yeah. So for myself, in my own pregnancies.
Yeah, and I'm sure also just being with, like, witnessing other women on whatever level, however that started. And I'm making an assumption, but it's because I think it would be hard to do, like, it makes sense given the kind of work that you do, that something about that and your own psychicness just allowed you to see more of the layers of what's really happening in a pregnancy, and through birth and through the postpartum, and all of the aspects of a new human joining us on you know, this side of the veil, whether they're join us living or they don't join us living. It's multi-layered, and it's much deeper than what, you know, what we're led to believe through sort of conventional mainstream maternity.
Yeah. So what I started to see was essentially, and as you said, so multi-layered, but what I started to see and what happened for me in that moment was like a return to their power and a return to my power, as you said. And I could just see then, because as I did in my own pregnancies and births, just peeling back this conditioning of just bullshit, just so much stuff that we had been taught, so like to cover up our power. And so yeah, as I said before, I had stepped into specifically birth work. It was women's work, and I saw this shedding and this return to self happening in the women's circles that I was running. And then yes, I walked even further with that, with my own births, and just, you know, like when everybody else was trying to add on information for these pregnant women and just trying to fill their heads with information and try and teach them about birth as if they already didn't know what birth was and how to birth, although they had programmed them to believe that they didn't. It was just completely the opposite. I just saw this work as like getting rid of all of that, deprogramming, pulling it all back, and really getting down to not even so much understanding birth, but understanding themselves and allowing themselves to really know that they could hold that power. And I think that's the correlation, right, between when we have these spiritual and psychic gifts, which I believe everybody does. It's just whether I believe it's whether we choose to really delve into it and walk it out in this life. But again, that's like another power to hold, right? So we were told so long ago, that power would get us in trouble or allow us to be killed. And it's so similar. Like I see them so similar. Birth and that the power of birth and being able to hold it, and the power of spiritual connection and magic as women.
Totally. And it really, like, it brings me back to that episode where you read the herstory, because that was such an articulate illustration of just how traumatized we've all been around our power, like really, really, really convinced through like generations and generations of trauma that it is dangerous to be in our power. That we're not allowed to claim it for ourselves. Do you believe in past lives, Anita?
Yes. Yep.
Do you believe that, or do you know maybe if you did this kind of work in a different life?
Yeah, I have been taken back a few times. Before I did do any journeying around that, though, I knew there was something around it and that I had done this type of work before, and that the fear I felt was so, so real, because when I was really like delving more into this, like the spiritual tools. So I guess that was the next step, right? So I owned that power that I felt within, and then I wanted to reach out for these tools to use, like divination tools and tarot and even crystals. And I would hide them, Amy. I would hide them in a room or a cupboard, and I wouldn't let anybody know except for like people that I felt really safe with. So I mean like 2 or 3 people in my life at that time. They knew about it, and they were just like, why are you being so weird? Like, why are you hiding this? And I just said, I can't explain it. But I just can't explain the fear that I feel if somebody saw them and what might happen. And they're like, what do you mean? And I would just say, I can't explain it, but it feels like death. I don't know why. And I didn't have the language. I had no idea what the witch wound was then, but I knew it was something really serious. And then I can't remember who I spoke to, but it might have been like someone that did a reading, or it may have been someone that did a reading, or someone that I just connected to, because this is the other thing. When I started to reconnect and open up more, like people, as you know, like more and more people come into your realm that get it and have messages for you. And it's not unusual for me to have a random person come up to me in public and tell me something about my life, or about like, or that they know what I'm thinking, or like just really weird events. And so these people that were close to me knew this as well, and they had been there for like similar situations. But anyway, someone had said to me, have you heard of the witch wound? And I said, no, but when you say those words, I know the language for something that I've been feeling. So I have journeyed myself to like back in times, and I've had like, I guess you could say, flashbacks. That's one of the lives that I have been to. And then there is another life that I've reconnected to, that like I was a really young child and I was on my own, and it was like cobblestone type environment. And I still haven't really figured out what that was, but I do know that I was, even at that young age, labeled like a witch or some sort of, I don't know, it was like I was a child with gifts or something, and I was rejected by my family, and I was just like literally homeless, walking around this kind of a village. So yeah, there's been a few.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just feeling it as I was speaking to you that this is like a continuation of work that you have been doing for a long time. And I don't know. I don't know if you feel this, but it feels like this time you're able to do it. You're able to do it without nearly the consequences that you had to worry about in other lives, that
Yeah.
it's able to be fulfilled this time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny when people, maybe my clients or people around me, will say, wow, some of the things that you're saying on Instagram, like it's very controversial and it's very polarizing. And I'm like, what? Oh, yeah, because I in past lives, like that reaction, now that I've done this healing and like really anchored into, right, this is not going to happen to me this lifetime. Like any reaction I get compared to what I feel like I remember I've experienced is nothing. It's just so different. And yeah, I do feel that as well. I do feel that I have done this before, like if not many times, and even, my ancestors too that have passed through things. And the reason I feel so strongly about that as well is because when I remember something about birth, or when something like along my journey, where as I was reconnecting to what birth actually is, because when I started this, I was petrified of birth when I started this journey for myself. And when I remembered things and kind of the crumbs were, when you like get the crumbs along the path and you pick up one and you remember something, it was an instant remembering. Like, oh yeah, of course. Like it didn't take much for the programming and the conditioning to fall away. And so it was like this instant come back to self. And I just knew that there'd be another piece of that and another piece of that. So that's another kind of, yeah, that's another sign to me that it's just been kind of covered up and it's not that far away. Like I have done this before. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, okay, I have several things that I want to talk about. First, I'll say I completely relate to that feeling of being like, I don't even really know how to explain it. It just feels like death. Like the fear is like,
Yeah.
it just feels like death. Because I remember when I was the first times that I was going to go live, when I decided that I wanted to, leave being a midwife and be an Akashic Records reader, and realizing like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to, or at least for me, it's not necessarily that it has to be this way for everyone, but I knew for me that I had to be willing to show up and be seen that way in order for it to work. And so that meant going live on Facebook. That was like the first step I could handle. And I felt like I was going to die. I had that level of fear. It was just so much fear. It was almost like trying to push myself literally to the edge of a cliff and just jump off the cliff. Yeah, I couldn't really pinpoint the fear, but it felt like death. So I really relate to that. And I think a lot of us carry that fear because we have been met with death or very, very intense physical, like root chakra level consequences for being in our higher chakras and being in our power. Do you still feel that fear?
Do you know the current situation in the world has, triggered it a little bit? I thought that I had that I had healed it, and I had on some level, but then this current situation, just with authority, and it has triggered it a little bit. And even my partner was like, at the beginning, he was saying, they wouldn't do that, and the words that would come out of my mouth, like, you don't understand. I know what authority is capable of. Like it would just come out in that way. So there's a new layer for me, and even a new layer again just in the recent days with what's been happening to our First Nations people, our Aboriginal Australian people, and what they've been doing to them in their communities. So that has like triggered, even more. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because immediately before you mentioned your Australian First Nations people, I was thinking that it was really similar here. Like I remember certain members of my family would just think like, well, they wouldn't do that. And I remember my very first thought was, what have they done to our First Nations people? You think it's about skin color? It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with earth magic. It has to do with like true soul magic. And, that is a threat, and they will genocide that right out. And it doesn't matter what color your skin is or what language you speak. If it is a language of power, if it's a light language in any way, in any form, that's what they're after. I actually don't know, because currently right now I'm very much withdrawn from the news so that I can maintain my sanity. So I don't know what has happened recently with your First Nations people in Australia. Would you share?
Yeah, well, me too. I don't watch the media, and actually, they have done a complete blackout on the media around this. This is just from finding out from the communities that I'm connected to, and Instagram, good old Instagram, where the truth, gets circulated. Essentially, they've been saying that there are COVID outbreaks in the Northern Territory, in the Aboriginal communities, and that because of that, they need to go in. They've actually had the military going in and removing people from their homes and taking them to what they call, a quarantine facility, or like a concentration camp, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
But they have also been forcibly giving the vaccine to people and even children, and threatening them with, well, if you don't leave and come into this quarantine facility, then we're going to vaccinate you, and doing that, and doing it to a lot of the elders, doing it to a lot of the children. So they would say on the surface that's because there are outbreaks in those communities and they need to take charge of it, which is ridiculous because they're isolated anyway, their communities. But there's been a lot of things behind the scenes that have been coming, that the Aboriginal communities have been working on, just like in terms of going way, way back, and, who actually owns this land and who the Australian government actually is. It goes pretty deep. But they've discovered, and they've probably known all along, it's just coming to a head now. They've just discovered so much fraudulence within the Australian government, and they don't own the land at all, that the Australian Aboriginal people do, and they know it. And so they've been making moves on that. And as soon as they started making moves on that behind the scenes, yeah, this all happened. So it's not a coincidence.
No, not at all. Not a coincidence at all. That's it's very it's very upsetting, and I understand that similar things are happening in Canada, where they're forcibly going on to certain more northern, as I understand, but how would I even know really? But First Nations reserves, and forcibly vaccinating people, and forcibly injecting them, which is why it just supports that it's really not, it's not a race thing. It's about, exactly like you said, it's about quelling people's power again. Like we're still in this cycle, in this theme on earth,
Mm-hmm.
people being in the birthright of their own power and
Mm-hmm.
being allowed to take up that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the disconnection of spirit and nature, which is like how I've always seen it, and who has the greatest connection to spirit and nature. Yeah, the oldest living culture on the planet, you
Mm-hmm.
know, within Australia. So they know it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you think this world is? What, like this, like, for example, I kind of think that this life is, or my best analogy is that it's like a dream within a dream within a dream. But sometimes I'll use interchangeably like a realm or a simulation, but more of an organic simulation, not like, the literal matrix kind of scary AI simulation, but like a beautiful organic like hologram where every particle of energy contains the whole
Mhm.
schema in an infinitely tiny little package. How do you see the world?
Mm. On which day?
Yeah, right.
Such a good question. I mean, what I have been shown more and more over the last like year or two is are these like multiple realities and these, yes, like a hologram. The way that I explained it and kind of got shown is like if a photo was taken of something that was vibrating really fast. I think I may have heard someone say this and I found the language for it as well. But if someone took a photo of the earth and because it's vibrating so fast, what that would look like with the shutter, you know, there'd be so many different, how do you describe it? Not a blurred vision, but like multiple, like if you took if you took
Right.
a photo of the, you know what I mean? If you took a photo
Yes.
of the earth, it's vibrating so fast, there would be multiple versions of the earth in that
Right.
image. So I've been seeing that more of late. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've also been really connecting to my star origins as well and my star family and just being given the information that, you know, I've been given a mission. And I know a lot of people say that too, and maybe that's cliche, but just been really strongly connecting to that and that, you know, we really are here to shift the planet, which I know again is overused, but I've been shown this whole imbalance of masculine energy on the planet. For a long time, I've been really aware of that and that I was here to rebalance with that feminine energy and bring the earth into some sort of harmony. So I don't know if that answers the question,
It
but I
does.
guess, okay.
Well, now it makes me want to talk about your star origins. Tell me, and I totally, I know exactly like when you're saying like, oh, it's kind of cliche or overused. Like, I have the same feelings, and I sometimes like skepticize myself, but then it just keeps. It's so persistent, right? It's like, no, I know I was born to be here at this time. I know it. Like, it doesn't matter how sort of, like Marvel sort of hero's journey, superhero-y kind of thing it sounds, it just feels true. And I believe that there are a lot of us that we're not just accidentally here. We're very much deliberately, purposefully here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, star origins, I guess we probably have many. The one that I've most been connected to is Sirius A and have like had visitations up there and met some guides and saw some like Lyran guides, which yeah, again, like I usually get shown things and have never seen it before and don't have the language. And then I just get straight into researching like what do kind of human slash cat people who are they, what are they, and then find the words like, okay, so Lyrans. And yeah, so I have journeyed up there. I was actually talking about this the other day actually in relation to my son and the way he was with me before I'd even thought about having children, and the way that he presented to me. And of course you only really know like when you look back and connect the dots. But in my early 20s, I would see lions all the time. It was actually ridiculous. It was like a thing. Even people around me knew, like they would say, "Are you joking? There's another like, you know, not a real lion, but like an image of a lion or a picture or a stuffed toy or something. It'd be on TV like all the time." And so I knew that there was this connection to that Leo energy. And then I, over the years, felt really connected to the Lionsgate portal, just kept getting drawn to all of these things. It was so connected to this Sirius A energy and Sirius energy. And then, so when I had my son, I knew he was going to be a Leo because I knew he was going to be born in August, but I didn't, because I was free birthing, I didn't have a due date. And I didn't even, when I was pregnant, think, oh, he might come through on the Lionsgate. like, that'd be so cool. Like, I didn't even think that. I don't know why I didn't, but he was born
Well,
on the, yeah, he was born on the 8th of the 8th. And then the craziest thing was we decided to name him Hunter at the like very beginning of my pregnancy. And we did the same with my daughter. We named them when, I was carrying them. And so his last name is Hunter. So after he was born, my partner was saying, "Oh, did you realize that it's his initials are HH?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah." And he said, "Do you know that's the 8th letter of the alphabet?" And we were like, "What?" That's crazy. And so from then I could trace everything back and connect the dots. And the reason I was sharing that story is because when I took a journey up to Sirius A and met my what they labeled themselves as my star parents, and then I met my star guides, and it was crazy. And I know you'll understand this, but we were communicating, but we weren't. It was like telepathy. And I just remember when I was there, they said, "Oh, we sent you down, but we sent someone down with you." And I said, "Oh my gosh, it was my son, wasn't it? It was Hunter." And they said, "Yeah, but he's your brother." You can imagine, like, I don't know, like when you're ever in that realm and your logical mind tries to step in and go, "What the hell is happening?" And
yeah.
I was like, "No, just let it, we'll figure it out later." And I just had this full energy of knowingness. And they said, "We sent him down to protect you at this time." Yeah, and this whole kind of story around that. So that's like a bit of a snapshot of it, but it was pretty crazy and so funny. When I was telling my partner, he was like, "What do you mean he's your brother? That's weird. I don't understand." I'm like, "I know it's not logical, but it's a knowing. Like, yeah, I just know because he has that, my son has that very protective energy. Yeah, even like right now, he will not let me leave the room. Like when the collective energy is really intense, he, like, if I leave the room, he just, yeah, he's losing it. So yeah, that's one part of my star origin story.
That's so cool. And I mean, to me, it makes total sense. Like, why wouldn't he be your brother? Like, why would he have to be born as your brother in this life to be your brother like somewhere else? You know what I mean? I don't know. To
Mm.
like my brain just completely gets that.
Yeah,
And
that's why I shared it with you. Don't share it with many others.
and I mean, but a lot of people, I think, upon reflection, would consider like people in their lives, especially we notice it a lot with children, I think, because we're sort of conditioned to believe that like our children should be under our authority, but that's just conditioning
Mm.
bullshit. So it's noticeable then, I think, when we have a child in our life that is like especially precocious and that you can't quite put your finger on it, but you just feel a little bit like you're talking to like an old woman or
Hmm.
like they just have a different energy. So I think we notice it more. But I think a lot of us would stop and reflect and be like, yeah, the human relationship that we have doesn't quite explain the full dynamic that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I was definitely I could like really feel the Lyran energy. That I wasn't surprised when you said that. I was a bit surprised about Series A, but the Lyran I really felt. What did it so when you traveled up to Sirius A, did you get visuals? Are you a visual psychic person, or what are your ways that the energy translates itself to you?
Ye-
Oh, what a terrible sentence. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, very visual. Very visual. And then the second part of it is like blocks of consciousness dropped in,
Mm.
which is exactly how I do readings and do my work. And when I'm doing any channeling with clients or writing or whatever it is, it's very much the same. So, and that's funny because even as I'm saying that, like the blocks of consciousness, that's just the language I've had for it. But I guess that is telepathy. It's communication, like, and it's a block. And that's why, like, it's funny, like I have had these blocks of consciousness drop in for a long time. And I used to have this perception that people thought I was like slow or dumb, because I was literally trying to translate a huge dump of stuff in another language into my language. I don't know if you, I'm sure that you know exactly what I'm talking about, but I've always had that. And it wasn't until I had language for it later on, or like really unpacked it, that I realized what was kind of happening. So yeah, that was the visual. It was, well, that was the experience. It was visual, very highly emotional, like so many tears released and realizations, and yeah, so very strong emotional impact experience of it. And then yeah, those blocks of consciousness. So yeah.
Yeah, I relate so much. Those are my main ones too, is like clairvoyant, and I call it claircognizant, but it is like, it's very much like telepathy. It's like a communication, and but also sometimes just a knowing that isn't like, I just know the thing without
Mm-hmm.
it having like without having to show my work in math, when you like get the answer and you have to
Yeah.
I could never show my work. I was just like, but I know the answer. But I did not do well in math because of that. So what did Sirius A kind of look like to you? How did that energy translate visually for you?
That's hard to explain. I just remember like a bright environment and with a blue tinge. So yeah, I've actually tried to really grasp onto something with that with my logical mind, and I can't yet. I think I need to go back. But I wasn't really shown much more than that. Like it was, yeah, it was kind of, yeah, I don't have much information around that. And like I said, my logical mind was like, so did it look like a planet? Like what does a star look like? What does a, yeah, I was really trying to like grip onto something with that, but I haven't been shown that yet. It was literally just a space, and like it was like we were in space, like it was dark background and just very bright, like around us with like a blue tinge. That's all I can really, yeah, pinpoint.
Yeah, I really get the color blue with Sirius too, but I think when I'm seeing Sirius, it's more of, I want to, maybe it is Sirius A, I don't know. I want to say Sirius B, but I I also don't know if it's a planet. Like I really don't know, and I always take it with such a grain of salt that I can only interpret this energy through the understanding that I already have. And like I can almost sometimes feel, just like you were describing, my conscious mind kind of not deliberately, but just like acts just by default, sort of warping the purity of the information to fit
Mm,
in its own like context of understanding, and then further to try and put it into English words to communicate it.
yeah.
And it does feel like a lot more abstract, and I'm not even really sure they're planets, which is why I tend to use the word realm, but just only because realm is very vague. It's, to me, it's just like an environment somewhere. That kind
Yeah.
of covers it.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. I think I, like, after I experienced it, I think I could have allowed my mind to create something tangible for myself. And I actually stopped myself because my brain wanted that. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So what would you mind sharing what kind of work you do? I guess it probably changes a lot, especially if you're really, really anchoring that divine feminine, that it kind of, I'm sure it very much flows however it needs to and wants to. But so at present, what kind of work do you do with your clients?
Yeah. So I work with consciously conceiving women as clients, but I also work with women that are pregnant. So some are just, wanting to connect in with their spirit babies, and that's different work to the women that are already pregnant. But I guess in summary, it's a reconnection back to that intelligence of nature first. So connecting in with the cycles and the seasons and remembering that everything is a cycle. And I just see this flow that goes through nature and everything in nature. And that when we I mean, it's always flowing through us, but even more so when we're carrying life within us, and just guiding them back to all the ways to reconnect to that first. And then the spirit element for me is, so when I'm guiding women in that way, is to help them create a celestial support team, essentially. So we've been so conditioned to look outside of ourselves and ask the experts, and yeah, you know what I mean, like the medicalized world and the industrial world. But that's only because we've been taught as women to doubt ourselves and to distrust our body and all of that. So I find that getting them to either build their team, so their support team, the unseen support team, or just reconnect to them, is a really big part of my work as well. So that when they are slipping into the programming, or when it comes up, or, and that usually looks like fear or doubt or mistrust or whatever it is, that they can seek guidance there first, and also within themselves. So it is the inner work, but I think for women that maybe haven't delved into that before, sometimes it's hard to even trust their inner self. So yeah, reconnecting with that team, and then of course that unseen celestial support team always returns them back to themselves. So that's one part of it, but there is also so much healing that we do as well. I do a lot of healing with women in terms of their menarche, their first period, their own birth experience, around anything that I can see within them where there's trauma. And it's usually the women that don't think they have trauma, because maybe they haven't experienced in this life, or they haven't had a traumatic birth experience, but I can see it within them that is maybe being passed down, or from previous lifetimes, or from the work they did in the world, right? Like if they were a witch or a wise woman or a healer or a herbalist, and tapping into those feminine rites of passage and how they experience that is a big part of the work as well.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. What is one of the most powerful client experiences that you've facilitated that comes to mind? Sort of that work of like connecting them with their star team, their spiritual team in a way that supports them and brings them back to themselves.
My gosh, I have to think about that.
Like when women come to work with you, are they kind of ready? Have they already sort of established a team, or are they sort of feeling like guided there against their own sense of logic and programming?
A lot of the women that I work with are me when I was first pregnant, or first thinking about starting a family. So had delved into like the spiritual world and had awoken a lot of things, but was really trying to navigate it and really trying to learn how to apply it to this new journey. So yeah, I think I keep saying this, but like they are looking for the language, or they're looking for maybe even confirmation, just really not validation, but more confirmation that what they're feeling is actually their support team. So yeah, most of the women I work with, or that seek to work with me, have started out on that journey somewhat, even if they haven't really had a huge consciousness of it or put a whole lot of energy into it. They have, and then they have on another level, I suppose. And then when we start working together, it just unravels, and they just remember and remember and remember. And they just, like I said, they just remind me of my own journey and all the light bulb moments that, of course, like birth is a spiritual experience,
And when you had that experience for yourself, how did it set you up to move into motherhood? Like, did it activate things in you that hadn't been activated? I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, because I can kind of see as you're painting out the picture of like who it would have been, somebody like me too, that already, it was like I was already ready. I already believed all that, but it was that experience of being confirmed that I wasn't the only one. I wasn't just making it up in my imagination. And therefore, it's almost like somebody giving me permission to have my power activated.
Yeah. And just touching on the first part of that, how did that experience prepare me for motherhood? Well, the fact that, or the realization that we're not in control. We're not in control of birth. We're not really in control as parents. And seeing that we are, a guardian for them, but they have their own existence and their own intelligence and their own free will. And I see birth as the same thing. I always get shown birth to look like it's almost like an entity. It's almost like an entity itself that rolls through the body and works together with the physical body and all the different parts of us and with the baby. That's what I always get shown. And so I guess, yeah, birth is its own power, just as our children are. And so when I learned that, oh, okay, birth is just going to roll through me anyway, it's whether I stop it or allow it. It's kind of the same with with parenting. They have their own will, and whether we say don't do this or not, how easeful are we going to allow it to be, parenting and birth? And for me, that was like so much of my unlearning, because having not such a great childhood and growing up in a family where it was very, very volatile, I leaned to like the anxiety and the control aspects when I was out of that. And so for me, that was so much of my, as I said, deconditioning in preparation for birth, that, yeah, I really need to let go of the control and trying to predict so much. As we know with, anxiousness or anxiety, it's really just trying to look too far into the future and try and predict every moment that's going to happen so that we can be on top of it and be able to handle it. Yeah, and that's what I see in a lot of the women I work with as well, because again, that was me. And so this is where that whole search for education and training and knowing about birth comes from, and why there's a whole industry around that, and why women gravitate towards that so much first. Like, how many books can I read about it? How much can I learn and know so I can try and predict birth at every turn? But to me, that's the wrong path to go down, because you can't. Like, we don't have control. We have control over certain things, that, how safe we are when birth is going to come through us, and the environment we're in and the people that are around us. But to try and predict and know what birth is going to do, which, as you would know, the medical industry tries to do, it's just not possible. We can't capture it.
No, we can't. And not only that, but it takes away so much of the space that is required for the magic to unfold. It stifles it and shoves it into a little box. And so that the opportunity for those miracles, as we would understand them, those amazing, breathtaking, mind-blowing things that we can't explain, the opportunity for those to happen, it's so hard for them to happen when we are obsessively trying to control. And I also noticed while I was working as a midwife that it seemed to me, and this is just anecdotal, I didn't do any studies on it, but it seemed to me that a lot of nurses and doctors and midwives had complicated pregnancies, pregnancy losses, emergency C-sections, IUGR, so babies that were measuring too small for how far along they were in the pregnancy, like just a lot of complications. And, even myself, I ended up having the loss of my newborn son after a premature birth. And I think there's a lot of ideas that I have as to why that is, but it just goes to show that it doesn't matter how much learning you do, as you're saying. Like, it just does not matter. You can learn everything. You can feel like you're the most prepared and you know the most like knowledgeable knowledge about birth, and it's still out of your control. It just simply is.
Yeah, absolutely. And birth was happening well before we had like the textbooks that we have now and the instruments, and it's ancient. It's an ancient force. And if it was so dangerous and failed so often, which is what is said, then we wouldn't be here, right? Like, if it was such a failed system, they're probably not the right words because we're talking about the system, but if it was such a, you know what I'm trying to say, if it wasn't going to work and it didn't work, we would not be here.
Yeah, if it was such a flawed process, then we wouldn't.
Thank you. That's the word.
We wouldn't exist. So it's like just shy of 7 a.m. for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. And then also, but that's not to say that, birth never results in death, but the weird, like, death is not a failure. It's not a failure. And the framing of it as a failure is what keeps us in a place of fear and keeps us in a place of seeking to control. But when we seek to control, like I said, we edge out all of the miracles that can happen, like just absolutely life-changing miracles. And it doesn't have to be this hard. And I feel like that is really kind of one of the purposes of the birthing system as it is now. And of course, a lot of people who are used to the birthing system would say, like, that's silly and everybody just wants the best and safest outcomes. But I don't really think, I think a lot of people on the ground level do, a lot of healthcare practitioners do, and certainly, most parents do. But it's just because we've been disconnected from the truth about death and the truth about spirit and the truth of our magic and the truth of our power, that we see death in terms of failure and loss and tragedy. And it is loss, and it is tragic, and it is life-altering, heart-wrenchingly devastating, and yet it is, life-altering and beautiful, and consciousness goes on and our connections go on, and your son is your brother in a different star realm, and the love just echoes on in perpetuity, no beginning and no end.
Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking about when you were speaking about the system and why it is, and yes, that death is a failure or a lawsuit in our modern day. I think it relates again so much to the witch wound. Birth is this thing that, I'm going to say men, but you know what I mean when I say men can't capture. It's this unknown, unseen intelligence. And man just wants to capture everything and be able to replicate it and be able to like pull it apart and understand it. And that's how I see, I think because there is so much unknown to it, that's what they fear the most. And I think that is what relates then again to, when we were women and healers and witches and herbalists and midwives, traditional midwives, it was something that we knew how to do that we didn't have any tangible explanation for a lot of the time. I've been shown and I remember. And again, that's why there was the witch burnings, because it was something that was unseen that they couldn't understand. And so then, they feared it. And it's the exact same thing to me. It's the same power that we have such a connection to, and that's why women are so, that's how it is. But yeah, do you see it the same way? It's like that same thing that cannot be captured.
I do, and I feel like it's really ultimately it's our magic. It's our magic that can't be captured. I mean, it's magic, period. It's the magic of nature, not just human magic, but human magic is very special, but it's the magic of nature, and it can't be captured, it can't be quantified, it cannot be controlled. And yet it's so powerful that, the beings who are occupied by a consciousness that is driven by a lust for power, they will not give up in their effort to control it. And I really do think, and I mean, I could never talk about this like to this extent as a midwife to my colleagues because they full on just thought I was nuts. Like, but I just saw it as like, they're trying to get at the new, most powerful, fresh beings right from the start. And like, I don't even mean this with hyperbole. I mean, like, they're trying to hurt them on their way in and hurt others and hurt their fathers, like on the way in upon arrival, so that everyone is then wounded and is sent back out into the world with this confusion of like emotion of joy and numbness and trauma and pain and confusion and love, and or sometimes so much numbness that they can't feel any of that, but they know they should be feeling something. And and then like, go forth now, raise this powerful being while you're all wounded together. And it compounds because every generation that isn't born in their sovereignty and isn't received by hands that hold true reverence for their autonomy and their sovereignty, then is wounded in this way, and we all bump around together in the world wounded in this way. And so even though they still can't capture and control our magic, they know that at least they've sort of disconnected us from our magic too, and we don't even really know it's there.
Yeah. And I was just thinking though, sometimes it's so hard with the work I do because my whole vision was, and my humanness just wanted to do the same thing and save women, do the same thing as what, so many birth workers think they're doing. And just to move these women away from the systems. And that's, been at the core of my work for so long. And then I had this guidance around, maybe these souls have chosen to experience that at the very beginning so that they have their awakening sooner. If we came here to forget to then remember, then maybe they chose for it to be at the very beginning of life, which I know is, that's a hard thing to kind of grasp. And even, this situation in the world right now, I see that on some level we called this experience in for our ascension as well. And so some days I'm like, oh, so what am I even doing then? If like we're all just meant to be doing these things anyway. But yes, as you were saying with birth, and this is still what I'm so passionate about, I still think that should be the most sacred beginning to life. But it is absolutely intentional from the top. I think that like as it streams down, obviously not everybody understands that it's intentional to hurt mothers and babies and to rob them of their innocence and their power, and to cause that within them from the very beginning. But that's a whole other agenda, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's absolutely intentional from the top. Yeah
It is a whole other agenda. And like that, I mean, that's the kind of thing, like I could have a whole entire other 3-hour conversation around that. But I agree with you. Like I mean, it's funny because on one hand, here we are witnessing the play out of duality and polarity, right? And a sort of like, it's very apparent that there is, whatever words you want to use for it or to describe it, you could say it's like light and dark, or good versus evil, or power versus or like corruption versus freedom, or enslavement versus freedom, or whatever. But it's duality, right? And we're watching it play out. But also, I agree with you so much that it is to our benefit if we choose it to be. And the process of choosing that is very messy. Like the things that wound us do not diminish us. They do not diminish us, our wounds, ever. But we can sure feel diminished. And sometimes we need to feel diminished until we don't anymore. And then we, just by the power of our decision, we therefore are no longer diminished. So meaning, like, in the case of, babies being born in suboptimal situations, and mothers experiencing that, you're right. Like, there's, on one hand, it is suboptimal. It really sucks, and it's not the way it has to be. It's not the way it was designed to be, and that sucks. And there's, we don't ever have to release that frustration that around knowing that it isn't supposed to be that way, but also that it can be to our benefit nonetheless. If we choose it, it can be towards our awakening. It can be towards our expansion and our ascension. And we always carry the power to transmute all of these things that we experience. And we don't need to save anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because when I free birthed my son, that was my whole mentality. Like, every woman needs to do this. And I'm sure you would have felt the same. Like, every woman needs to do this. This is how birth should be. This is exactly how it should be. And then since then, I've started to realize that my role is in more helping women and, maybe even children navigate that awakening from whatever their experience was. So as you said, like, it's a messy journey. And so sometimes we just need, like, someone to just keep returning us back to ourselves so that we can remember, like, what it is we're here to do, to ascend, to evolve, to grow. And I kind of move my energy more to that, instead of having this, like, I mean, I still do. I still want birth to return to its natural state, but I guess I just mean my energy is kind of dispersed in other areas now. And so whatever the event was, to, like, if that's what they chose, and that's what they chose. And then, so, okay, now let's remember. Let's remember what birth actually is. Let's remember what you're here for. Remember what, your mission is, or your growth, or whatever it is.
So beautiful. Like just focusing on everyone's resilience, and just being like, yeah, this is the emergence experience that you had, and now let's remember who you actually are in there, and what all of this was for.
Yeah. It's kind of two-pronged, because then I see, if more women were experiencing that birth, then that tips the balance with this whole, I get shown this whole scale of, like, masculine and feminine energy. So if, like, women were returning to birth in its natural state, there would, the scale would tip, right? And so that's the first part. So I feel like we'd be moving so much more into the feminine to rebalance. So that's the first bit. And then if that's not the case, then we get to do that individually, I suppose. So it's like a collective, I don't know, it's all intertwined, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is all intertwined, and it's all messy, and I think there's just not a linear path to the sort of, like, I think you and I are both accessing a similar vision of what is possible, and what was sort of like what the inherent design is within our own DNA, and within the DNA of everything in nature. And yet the path to get there, I think, is not linear, which it wouldn't be, because the feminine isn't linear.
Exactly. But
Well,
yeah, I think that's probably at the crux of it, right? The preservation of the DNA.
yeah, well, yes. Yes, and that is a whole other conversation. A whole other conversation. Well, Anita, I have kept you over the allotted time. I've so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for coming and sharing your perspective and your spiritual awakening story and some of the work that you do with us. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been awesome.
And where can everybody find you?
So I'm mostly on Instagram at the Midwitch, or the podcast, The Midwitch, or on my website, themidwitch.com.
Awesome. And that will all be linked in the show notes for easy access. Yeah, it was just such a joy to talk to you. Let's talk about the DNA.
Yeah. How many more?
Yeah.
How many more conversations should we open up?
I know, right? Those cans of worms. Thank you, beautiful listeners, for your time and your attention. I value it as always so very much. And just remember how powerful you are. Remember how powerful your attention is, and that through your attention, you are manifesting a timeline. You are manifesting a version of reality. You are that powerful. We are that powerful. That's what this whole sham, this whole pantomime nonsense situation that we're living through is because we are that powerful. Come back into our power now. Thank you, everyone, and I'll catch you on the next episode.
Hello, beautiful being of shadow and light. If you loved this episode and you want more, you can join my new membership, Light Codes. This membership is the place where you will receive all the light codes that I am channeling on how to navigate the intensifying energies of this next phase of the rapid awakening and ascension of the human collective consciousness on Earth. But also all the light codes on how to step into our highest selves, to activate our soul mission, to harness our magic and power as creators, and to manifest the highest timelines for ourselves and for the collective. To find out more information about light codes and all the ways to work with me, see the link in the show notes or visit amybelair.com. Thank you so much for being here with me on this episode. I appreciate you more than my words could ever say. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and share, and I will catch you on the next episode.